Given the higher IQ of Northeast Asians, do you have any theories as to why their civilization hasn't given as much to the world, why they haven't invented as many things, etc.?
You know, the trouble with this whole field being so riddled with taboos and corrupt in academia is that there are so few scientists addressing what are obviously fascinating questions. Questions such as the one you've asked is fundamentally interesting. I mean, here we have a real anomaly. The East Asians seem to have a higher IQ, but they have a lower level, at the moment anyway, of cultural productivity. How can this be? But in order to address that question, academics have to first admit that the higher IQ of East Asians than whites is in fact meaningful, which they won't do because, not that they don't want whites to be below East Asians, but if they do that, then they'll have to accept that Africans are so much lower than whites. So this is another unresolved question.
Professor Rushton, most of the advances that have been most important for technology, science, I imagine they are disproportionately, if not almost exclusively, the product of what we would call geniuses. And the Asian IQ is slightly higher than the white, but white people have the IQ is more spread out. So doesn't that give us just as high a percentage of geniuses as the East Asians? Might that not be part of the explanation as far as why most of the important advancements for society seem to have come from the Western white countries?
Yeah, I'll repeat what you just said slightly differently. As far as I can see, there are three good reasons, three good explanations for why East Asians do in fact have a higher IQ than whites, but have not been as culturally innovative recently. The first one is, as you've just said, that the bell-shaped distributions differ. Even though the average East Asian is higher, the standard deviation is narrower. So there's a lot more people clustered around the mean, whereas our bell-shaped curve goes out to the extreme, so we've got more geniuses than they do. That's one possibility. Another possibility is that they have a very cautious temperament, which in fact inhibits them from being especially creative. The third one, which I'm inclined to favor slightly, and I'd like to look much more into it, is that for most of history, the East Asians have in fact been ahead of white Europeans. But there have been one or two little blips where we're close enough that these blips can actually sometimes put us slightly ahead. The last of which was the Black Death. The Black Death in the 1380s throughout Europe, for example, killed 50% or more of the population of England. This was a huge, huge loss. And like all viruses, it takes the bottom half much more than it takes the top half of the IQ and social distribution. So in other words, if you lose 50% of your population, the low IQ population, then the group that's left, and they all moved into towns, by the way, right after that led to the Reformation, and the brighter ones married the brighter ones, you got assortative mating, you spread out temporarily the normal distribution. You suddenly produced a whole flowering of high IQ people. And that was, of course, the Elizabethan Renaissance in England and elsewhere in Western Europe. And I think that is what, in some ways, we're still living on. And some of the assortative mating movement from city to city, so high IQ people can marry high IQ people, it pushes the tail out. But if that theory of mine just then is correct, what it implies is that East Asians are now reverting back up to their natural level of being slightly ahead of whites.
I'd like to return to the Asian, Caucasian question for a second. And you said that perhaps in the historical continuum that Asians have been ahead of Europeans for more periods of history or longer periods of history. And as a person who that's my field of history, I would contest that. The great earliest civilizations were almost all Indo-European, and even there's a lot of evidence today, in fact, that even the Asian civilizations, such as China, that Europeans introduced the wheel and many other, the very basics, the domestication of the horse, for instance, to the Asian people. And one explanation I'd like you to comment on, this is the basis of my question, is Michael Levin said something very perceptive in his book Why Race Matters when he mentioned the fact that he made the hypothesis that high IQ in connection with higher testosterone levels led to achievement, and a slightly higher testosterone level with low IQ led to criminal. Well, that's what I thought you said, sir. I'm sorry. But one of the scientists anyway said this, and I picked this up, and I thought it was Mr. Levin. But the point is, do you think that the slightly higher testosterone levels in terms of whites as compared to Asians could lead to that more aggression, which not only could be more aggressive at slightly crime levels, but also more aggressive in terms of scientific inquiry, conquest, scientific interest, the Faustian spirit that represents European mankind?
Yes, I certainly do. I wouldn't have thought that Professor Levin would have disagreed with it. Maybe he's just disagreeing with the person who asked the question. I don't know. But anyway, there is a lot of evidence to suggest that creative genius requires a certain amount of what is sometimes called psychopathy, a little bit of erratic behavior, a little bit of extra boldness in thinking, just to go those several steps further. And if it's channeled into a high IQ, socially productive channel, then you get genius. And if it's true that Orientals have less testosterone, then they're going to produce fewer of those geniuses. So I think that's an eminently sensible hypothesis.
Sorry to have to bring this to an end, but we're out of time. And